Welcome to a fabulous Tuesday here, and we are going to talk about a topic that we don't want to seem depressive, hospice. But our guest and our discussion today is going to be around some of the opportunities, some of the hope that hospice can bring. We want to kind of shift that script a little bit on the term hospice because that can definitely cause a little anxiety. But our guest today is really going to share some things that are starting to change. It's still going to offer the same great benefits, but there's going to be some new positive twists that we're going to see. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the ever wonderful Catherine Wells.
The ever wonderful. Of course, that's me.
That's right.
Hey, everyone. Glad to see you here. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Mr. Jim Parker, who is the editor of Hospice News. And you've probably seen, if you're in the industry at all, you've probably seen some of their publications from Aging Media. Really excited to have Jim here to talk about what's been happening in hospice, how it's been impacted by COVID, and where we see hospice going. So, Jim, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. We would love it if you would share with our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got into what you're doing.
Oh, of course. I am editor of Hospice News. As you said, we are a news publication that covers primarily the business of hospice. We touch on some of the clinical issues, of course, but our primary focus is the business of hospice. And I mean, I've had personal experiences in my family with, family members who have gone through hospice. I've seen the care that hospices provide, and I have a great respect and appreciation for the work that they do. Professionally, prior to joining Aging Media, I worked at the Joint Commission for 11 years, the accreditation organization, where I worked on the hospice standards and helped to put together their first palliative care certification manual. So that was kind of my professional entry in the world of hospice, and only deepened my appreciation seeing the kind of regulatory framework and clinical issues that hospices contend with through that experience. And then, when I saw that, Hospice News is a new publication, we launched it about 2 years ago. When I saw the opportunity to launch a completely new publication, totally devoted to hospice, I absolutely jumped at it. I mean, if I can use the skills that I've cultivated as a journalist to in some way support or benefit people who care for the dying and comfort the suffering and the grieving, then that's absolutely what I want to do.
That's so great. And I really feel like being able to share some of the stories that people have gone through is helpful to others, because there are a lot of myths around hospice. There are a lot of things that people believe that are not true or that are no longer true. And so we're going to talk about some of those today. But first, let's talk about the idea that a lot of people struggled through COVID and not being able to see their loved one, not fully understanding hospice care, but having a loved one put on hospice care. How do you see the impact of COVID long-term in the hospice care industry?
I think, I mean, that's a huge question. I mean, there's so many factors. I think one is an obvious one is we're going to see a lot more telehealth. During COVID, it kind of took the place of some of the physical contact, especially within facilities, nursing homes, assisted living, where, in a lot of cases, clinicians couldn't get access. But I think it will, balance out where it's more used to augment, the in-person care rather than, supplant it, going forward. And I think it'll be a valuable tool for hospice providers that could really benefit their patients. There were a lot of financial hardships for organizations during the pandemic. We saw that throughout the healthcare continuum. They suddenly needed, PPE, in much higher amounts, different types of PPE. That was very difficult for them to get. One hospice CEO told me that they saw prices rise 1,000% for things like masks. So, I mean, a lot of them struggled financially. And I think that could lead to more consolidation in the industry. There's been, the mergers and acquisitions market has been very hot for hospices, throughout COVID and before. It's probably the most active sector in healthcare. But I think a lot of the smaller organizations that got hit really hard financially by COVID may be more likely to consider selling to a larger provider, given, the circumstances that they found themselves in. I think another difficulty, I mean, for a long, long time, there's been workforce shortages in the hospice industry. There is simply not enough clinicians who are trained, have the specialty training they need, to provide that, patient-centered, care at the end of life, and probably even fewer who are willing to do it.
Burnout, right? From just seeing all the death during COVID. That had to exacerbate it. I really like the idea that telehealth is augmenting or has the ability to augment, and that was not an option before. So to me, that's a huge positive that comes out of COVID, is that we can start using technology in a new way that helps us, especially in an industry that is so short-staffed. And we'll continue to see all of these difficulties in getting staff and keeping good staff. And then I want to ask you about the mergers and acquisitions. I have noticed that over the last couple of years. My goodness, this is like a flurry of activity in the hospice industry for the last at least couple of years that I've seen. And maybe it's been going on longer. What do you attribute that to?
I think there's a few factors. I think the number one is the demographics. There's according to Kaiser Family Foundation, there's 10,000 seniors becoming Medicare eligible every single day. That's been true for about a decade, and it's going to be true, projected for another decade. They're going to need, I believe 80% of them are expected to have chronic or serious health conditions, and about 70% will have multiple chronic conditions, and they're going to need care. So I think investors are expecting these businesses, hospice, home health, things of that nature, to really grow, and they want to capitalize on that.
That makes a lot of sense. Real quick on that growth though, what I'm curious about is, as we have to, just do a lot more for potential employees to have them sustain, have you heard of any mention or discussion about, a dramatic change in the reimbursement, so that the providers can pay more for their talent and to keep their talent from, throughout that program?
I have not heard of any massive changes in reimbursement. The proposed payment rule that the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, put out a couple of months ago did not contain any major increases. It pretty much stayed flat. A couple of years ago, there was a 2.3% increase.
Right.
So I don't see, anything being done on the reimbursement level to affect that.
Yeah, and because it's just going to get interesting, is what for in the sector is just how we retain the top talent, so that we have more staff available to reduce that burnout, as Kathy and you mentioned, and to give people some downtime and use their skill sets heightened when they're there, but not working them 60, 70 hours a week because the agency has, short staffed. That I think is going to needs to be a goal. And we have to look at what does that mean from a reimbursement, from a cost, from all those, metrics, is going to pose some opportunities and challenges at the same time.
And it's all been
So true.
exacerbated by COVID. I mean, a lot of organizations told me that they saw a rising turnover, during the pandemic due to burnout or even just fear of contracting the virus.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we were talking through some of the merger acquisition and there's money to be made, so understand that it is a business. At the same time, how do we stay on top of the value-based care in hospice? How do we keep the heart and soul in it while some of these things are happening?
Yeah, that is tricky. And I think, while hospice providers see the opportunities that value-based care, can offer them, as well as, there's risks, I think it really comes down to, these are people who, before these programs, before the Medicare Advantage hospice carve-in, before direct contracting, they had a commitment to their patients, to their patient outcomes, to their patients' well-being, to their patients' comfort, and those are their families. And I think, maintaining that focus on, that of patient-centered care and making sure they're, meeting the challenge of providing that value while also maintaining their quality. I think it takes, really just a personal dedication to achieve that. And I do think it is achievable.
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely achievable. And the industry is so populated with people who really do care so much that they spent their time during COVID with patients rather than their own families a lot of times.
Yeah.
And they're, true definition of heroes in all of the senior care space. And I've just watched some hospice workers go so far above and beyond. It's heartwarming. So I think that's the one thing that when I think about mergers and acquisitions and it being such a hot space, I've been in the tech industry. I know what that looks like. And sometimes you lose the heart. So I do believe, though, that in the hospice industry, it's possible to keep the heart there, because that is really the core of what we do and what people do in the hospice world.
I think, Kathy, in any aspect of what we do here, when people take care of people and we're talking about merging entities or cultures, we have to go back to making sure the people we provide care for are the focus. No matter if you're 100 beds, 10 beds, 10,000 beds, right? If you lose sight of why you do what you do, it doesn't matter the returns you make. It doesn't matter the amount of money you make. You're still missing the point of what we need to be doing here. And that is ensuring that those that are leaving this world, whether it be a year or 6 months from now, are treated with the utmost respect and dignity that they had when we came into the world. And that has to be the core focus of what we do as we provide care.
So well said, Francis. You so well said. You always nail it with those. It's so well said.
Well,
yes. Yes, I agree.
I'm sorry, Catherine. I didn't mean to speak over you. I completely agree with that. And I think many, if not most, providers share that perspective. Yeah. I mean, one of the challenges of being a business journalist in hospice is, it's a blessing and a challenge is, while they are, savvy in business, you talk to hospice providers and, they're launching a new program, they're launching a new service, and you ask them, well, what's your return on investment for this? And sometimes you hear crickets, sometimes it's, but so often the answer is, well, it's the right thing to do. It makes our patients' lives better. That's the return. We're probably not going to make money on providing music therapy and things of that nature, or, pet services, these extra things that they do, they do it because they genuinely want, to improve their patients' quality of life.
That's fantastic. And kind of with that, I want to talk more about what other things does hospice offer? I think that's what I really would love to, dive into your expertise of what you've seen across the country of different services beyond what we think hospice is.
Yeah, I mean, Hospice itself is largely defined by the Medicare hospice benefit. You need that 6-month terminal prognosis, and it comes with a specific set of services. Hospice providers are really branching out, however. They want to start engaging with those patients and families well in advance of the end of life, whether it's through and service diversification is a big, factor in this. Many are offering palliative care, which of course is, has symmetries with hospice, but it can be provided at any time during the course of a patient's illness, not, strictly at the end of life. We're seeing, providers launching PACE programs. We're seeing them launching home-based primary care programs, home health, operations where they want to establish these longitudinal relationships with the patients. So they're not bringing them on, 3-4 days before the end of life when their ability to really care for them is limited.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, where most people, family members who don't understand the industry and don't understand hospice until they're told your loved one needs to go on hospice. We'd like to put your loved one on hospice. That's where some of these old myths stay alive because they're not getting on hospice sooner. So all they know is that hospice is this last few days of life, and all they're going to do is provide comfort care. Where it is true, hospice is comfort care once you go on it, but there's so much more that can be done. And I'm so grateful for hospice for both my mom and dad. They both had it at least 4 to 5 months at the end of their life. And while there were things I didn't know that I wish someone would had been able to explain to me better as a family member, like there are certain medications you have to go off of, or the patient will have to go off of during this time, because it is not about lengthening life. It's about improving quality of life during this time. So I really feel like there's so much that hospice can offer and does offer that people don't know about. What would you say to family members who may be thinking, I don't know if my loved one needs hospice, but if they do, where do I go to find information? Who do I ask? How do I get someone on hospice who pays for it? If they have all these questions, where would you send them?
That's a really good question. I mean, the internet is tricky, as we all know. I mean, there are national organizations out there like the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, the National Association for Home Care and Hospice, that do provide public education. Also, the hospices themselves. Even if you're not in a consultation to send your loved one to hospice, they often have workshops, they host community events, they visit faith-based organizations, community centers, where they really want to educate the public about what hospice is and what it's not. And like you mentioned, there were things that you wish you had been told when your loved ones went into hospice. I think that's really essential to note. People do need very careful communication, very careful education. They need to understand the decision that they're making.
Yeah, and to be fair, they may have told me, but I was very emotional.
Of course, right? Yeah.
So that's kind of that tricky part where you want to have someone kind of, giving you a little bit of grace during that time and reintroducing the content to you as you go. And I really, like music therapy and pet therapy, I didn't know about a lot of those with my mom. With my dad, I did, because they actually offered it to us. So are those types of things typically covered under the Medicare benefit, or are there things that family would ever have to pay for?
Typically, it's not. Family members typically do not have to pay for these ancillary services, or complementary therapies, as they often call them. A lot of time, these programs are paid for through philanthropy, or they're volunteers They may have massage therapists who volunteers to meet with their patients and provide care to them. So there's, hospices kind of find ways to, make it work. Their per diems that they receive from CMS, they vary from region to region, but I mean, you're looking typically at about $200 a day in most cases per patient. And, what they're able to do is limited considering, there are the medications, the nursing care, the physician care. But, they find other avenues, so a lot of hospices have founded their own nonprofit foundations to kind of raise money to provide, these services. And of course, they also leverage their volunteers, as I said.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad that we're seeing COVID restrictions loosen, because during COVID, a lot of those services that were non-essential, even though I hate to say that word, I really do, because I do believe they are essential, but weren't medically essential, kind of went to the wayside a little bit. We didn't have as much as those interactions for fear of the unknown of what this person who's coming in, could they be another possible exposure case, right? And so I'm really thankful, because I love the massage therapist. Is one of the coolest things I think I've seen from hospice. I think I learned about that a couple years ago, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, just the way it helps the resident and patients relax. And even if it was, I think they did about 10 or 15 minutes, that was it. And that was enough to see this sense of peace for those that are in hospice. I love that component a lot.
I agree. I mean, there's so many people that are afraid to touch a sick person or a dying person, fortunately, and that's just tragic. I believe there's a program, I think it's called Final Touch. A good friend of mine participated in. She's a massage therapist, and it's specifically for people who are dying, to receive that kind of touch. And, it just benefits people so much, I think.
Oh, it's huge. And everyone, I love that there's a variety of things that are being offered, or at least pre-COVID were offered, because different people respond to different things. Someone who's very creative and has been musical all their life, they respond to the music therapy more than somebody else. Or, I use my stories a lot, but when I share my stories, they're really sharing everybody's stories, because someone's had an experience like this. My mom, when she heard the Sound of Music movie come on TV, she just would sing. Mm-hmm. She wouldn't speak. She was nonverbal, but she would sing. And so these are the things that I think are just so important. And if they aren't offered, if music therapy or some sort of focus isn't always offered, it can be tough to draw somebody out. And that's something that can make them go into a deeper depression and be hard on everybody. What you're doing here is amazing. And what we really want our audience, at least the family member portion of our audience, to hear is that hospice isn't the same hospice that you may think it is. It really is no longer what we kind of maybe grew up with and heard that it was. It really does offer a lot of benefits, and I encourage you to explore it. If at all you have someone in your life who might be somewhere in that stage. And as Jim said, it can be 6 months. You need to have a doctor's order, I believe, for 6 months of prognosis. Prognosis. So, but we know people who've been on it for years and other people who graduate. So let's not make this a death sentence. Let's make it about celebrating life.
Absolutely.
So Jim, we always ask our guests, who in your life do you consider to be a maverick?
I am fortunate enough to know many people that I consider mavericks, but I think the one that came to mind first was my older brother, Michael. His last name is McKillop. It seems like he's constantly reinventing himself and undertaking challenges that most people would never undertake. He served in the 1991 Gulf War as a Marine. He obtained a cardiac infection, was sick for a very long time, and actually had a heart transplant a couple of years ago.
Wow.
during that time, he opened a restaurant. He launched a successful daycare business.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, he moved to a farm. He started a goat farm in Oklahoma. He,
I like him.
moved to the Dominican Republic to work on programs to, improve medical education there. So he's really, he was not slowed down by this grievous illness. And he's just kind of a risk taker. And sometimes those risks pay off. Sometimes they're a learning experience, but he always gets back up and always kind of, keeps going and is always looking for the next adventure.
Wow.
Well, now I'm inspired by Michael. Thank
Yeah.
you, Michael, for being an inspiration.
Yes. That's fantastic.
Yeah. That's like, there are days we all feel like, oh my gosh, can I get out of bed? And you think about what you just described. Yes. Yes. Yes, we can. Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. So what would you like our audience, what action would you like them to take after hearing this conversation today?
I think a couple things. One, I would really encourage them to educate themselves about hospice, what it is and what it isn't. Even if ultimately you don't choose hospice for yourself, your loved one, it's as important to understand what that choice entails. I think we need to shift the perspective that hospice is about death, as you alluded to Catherine. It's about how you want to live in your final day. It's about that quality of life. I think that's important for people to understand. I would also say, consider your own end of life wishes and put them in writing. Have that advanced care plans, do it before you get sick, do it before you're suffering. I've had so many doctors, in hospitals and high acuity settings tell me that we've done so many things to patients, invasive, painful treatments, keeping them in the hospital rather than in their homes, that we knew were not going to benefit them simply because we had no instructions not to. And if you want high acuity care, that's your absolute right. That's your choice. But, have a full understanding of what your options are and put that in writing before you may be incapacitated and unable to communicate.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And, Catherine and I have talked about this. I think you need to plan your aging experience as though you plan your retirement, kind of lay that plan out on paper. So it's that binder on a shelf that you might not need till you're 100 or 80 or 70 or somewhere in between. But I think the not planning and revisiting that plan is going to cause more unintended consequences than having a plan that you don't have to touch for 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's
well said. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. And for our audience, if you don't already read Hospice News, go check it out. Jim, if people want to learn more about you and about Hospice News, where can they reach you?
I can be reached at, there's my email address on the bottom there, jparker@agingmedia.com. Feel free to reach out anytime. I love hearing from readers or people in the industry, people with questions. You can find me on LinkedIn. The name is just Jim Parker, and I love to hear from the community. So feel free to reach out.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And really, I think when you're writing about such a could be a difficult industry to write about, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate that you share the human stories. I appreciate that you share the business side, because without a business side, this doesn't happen. So I really want to, there's heart and soul in this, but we also have to be able to run the business so that people can continue to do this, and we can continue to support the economy with our amazing workers, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jim, I just want to say a big thank you for kind of meshing, like Catherine said, of these different touch points that are really needed to educate and help evolve how we look at, aging and death and care and all those things that go into it. I think it's a fantastic voice that you bring to the industry and to your viewers and to your readers as well too. So thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Yeah, and we really enjoyed today. I learned some great things about kind of the Medicare and the reimbursements and all that stuff, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. So, viewers, if you guys have an experience with hospice or want to know more, feel free to put a little message in the chat, and we'll be happy to either connect you with a resource or share our knowledge if we're able to answer that question.
Right, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Yes, and have a wonderful rest of your week. And stay tuned for more information on our Collaboration in Aging event, which is going to be September 16th and 17th in Denver, Colorado. So we hope to see everyone there.
So thank you both so much.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.